This is a kit that I've got. I actually got this from eBay, and it was like $27, free freight and everything. And basically what this is this is the actual component that we're in question about. This is the fuel pump itself. Little bitty rascal, ain't it? Yeah. But this is what wears and starts bypassing and quits producing the proper fuel pressure. But what this kit also has is it has the seal that goes on the fuel pump mount where it goes into the tank. It also has a brand new sock filter on it. You got a new fuel pressure, the high pressure line, and it has some of the adapters and O-rings and clamps and things to just refurb this in your factory drop-in unit. So now what I'm gonna do is I'll set all this aside and I'll show you how to get that fuel pump out of the tank. Then we'll get it out here and show you how to disassemble it, and then we'll rebuild it with these components. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave our adapter harness still connected to the high pressure line that goes to the fuel rail, and I'll just simply disconnect it from over here on the fuel pump itself. Now there again, you're going to want to take your rag and stuff it around there to catch any residual fuel pressure that might spray out when you disconnect it. I have to take both hands in here. There we go. Yeah, we had a little spray there. All right. So we'll catch all that fuel there. I'm gonna set that aside. Now I'm gonna disconnect our electrical connection, and this has your fuel pump wires and also your fuel sender wires for your fuel gauge. And it's just got a lock tab right here. You just pull that up and just pull that back. There you go. Set that aside. Now the last thing that holds this fuel pump in is this big plastic ring, and it's just threaded onto the tank. Now I've already broke this thing loose because they can be kind of tight, but all you got to do is basically just start unscrewing the thing. There we go. Now that pump is going to be spring loaded, so it may pop up like this. And so now all we got to do is just start easing that out of there. Now as you start pulling it out, keep in mind that you need to watch for the wire that has the float on it, so you don't want to bend that. See, there it is right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ease that around. There we go. There it is right there. All right, now let's just remove this assembly and get it over on the workbench. Now I've got a fuel pump assembly up here on the workbench, and before I disassemble it, I'll go over a few things and what all we have here. Of course, this is your fuel sender unit here. The fuel pump is actually located down in the lower section of this housing here. That's obviously your fuel filter. This is your fuel pressure regulator, and then this is the high pressure line that goes to the top where your fuel rail hose connects. Now what we've got to do is we've got to disassemble this lower half from this upper half to get to the fuel pump itself. There's a couple things we've got to do before we do that. First of all, we're going to remove the fuel sender. Now I think I've seen evidence in here where somebody has been in this thing before, because I see several scratches and marks where somebody's been prying around on this thing. Also, there is supposed to be a little lock tab right in here that you press to release the fuel sender, and it just slides off a couple of rails right here. But obviously someone has been in there before and has broken that tab. But that's okay, it still slides into place, and I believe I can still salvage this and to where we can reuse it. And that being said, you want to be real careful when you're handling these parts, because the plastic that they use, it is kind of fragile, so it is pretty easy to break this stuff. So when we get ready to separate these halves, we got 3 tabs we got to work with. There's one here, and then there's 2 more here and here. Also, there's a slot in this lower half of this housing here that you want to be sure to remember when you're routing your wires for the pump itself. Another thing that we've got to do is the filter itself has a little lock ring on it. I'm going to raise it up here where you can see it a little better. You can see it right down in there, and that's what holds that sock filter onto the bottom of the pump. Now I've already partially pried that up, but you're going to have to take that out first before the pump will come out of that housing. Now don't worry about destroying it, because the kit is going to come with a new lock ring. So I'm basically just going to reach in there with a little hook tool and just pry around on that thing until I just pop it off of there. There you have it. Okay, we'll discard that. Now going to slide this back off and just kind of set it off to the side. And then I'm going to work on these 3 tabs here. There again, you want to be kind of careful with them because it is easy to damage this. So what I do is just pry them up enough to get it to kind of pop loose, and then work around to the other 2 and do the same thing. Just pry them no more than is absolutely necessary to get them to come up and release. Okay, I think I've got it there now. Yep. Okay, so now we'll slide that off and separate it. Now there's a upper fuel pump mount that's liable to fall out. Don't worry about that. I'll show you how to put that back in the correct orientation later. Also, I'm going to go ahead and pull the fuel filter off. We'll discard that. And now we should be able to pull the fuel pump out. There we are. Third piece that's down in here that we're going to take out, there's a rubber stop that the fuel pump rests on, this item here. There again, don't worry about the orientation of that. We're going to discard both of these because the new fuel pump comes with new ones, and I'll show you how all that goes. Okay. Now we've gotten everything kind of apart here, what we're going to have to do is the wires that go to the fuel pump are actually soldered on. So what we're going to do is we're going to unsolder those wires. You want to be sure to remember that the blue one is on the plus side and ground is on your negative side. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to unsolder these wires, and then we're going to solder them onto the new pump, and then we're going to reassemble it with the new upper and lower mounts. I'm going to unsolder these wires on this fuel pump, and I'm going to pull you in here kind of close where you can see just what we got going on here. And what I'm going to do is, since I only got 2 hands here, I'm going to kind of hold on to this wire on the positive side and just hold a little bit of pressure on it. I'm just going to take my soldering iron, touch to it, just pull that wire right out, just like that. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing on the negative side. Just hold a little pressure on it. Wait for that solder to melt. Just pull it right out. Just like that. And there's our old fuel pump. See ya! Now I've got our new fuel pump just kind of sitting there, and what I've done is I cleaned off the excess solder off the wires so that they fit in the holes in the terminals. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of solder and just solder the wires right back in place. Just like that. Yeah, that's a good tight connection. All right, we can reassemble this pump now. Okay, now we're going to assemble this fuel pump. I'm going to get down here a little closer so you can see the orientation of this upper pump plate. When we took the pump apart and the original one fell out, there really wasn't a good way to tell how it goes, but the pump comes with a new one, and what you'll note is the positive and negative lugs on top of the pump. You can see there's indentions in that plate that shows which orientation they go. So you just put that on there like that. Then make sure your wires come through the gaps in the back, and then that adapter plate should sit flush on top of the pump motor, just like that. Next, we're going to put the O-ring in place, and I've put just a little trace of grease on that to help ease that up in that pump housing. Now here's our pump housing, and you can see the opening that nose of that pump is going to go into. So we're just going to ease that around very carefully, put it in there so it goes in all the way. And there's not really a way to actually center this thing, so what I do is just try to put it in the center of the housing as best I can, just like that. Now we're going to put on our bottom rubber cushion plate, and there's a couple of lugs here and here on the fuel pump, and if you also note, there's a couple of lugs on that cushion plate that line up. So you just flip that over like that, set that down on there till they line up with the lugs on the bottom of the pump. just like that. And like the top plate, it should set flush. Okay. Now we've got all that lined up. I'm gonna pull back a little bit so you can see the big picture. And now we've got all that lined up. Now we're gonna put our bottom housing on. And be sure that you line up the 2 rods that align everything, and make sure that your wires go into this groove here so that you don't pinch them. So now I'm not going to snap it in place just yet. I'm just going to kind of hold it all together there. Also look at the pump and make sure it is turned the right way so that our filter will line up with it. And once you feel like you got everything about like what you want it, then go ahead and snap it all in. Just push it together till all 3 snaps make connection, just like that. And then check and make sure that you have your wires for the pump and the groove there. Make sure they're not pinched under, just like that. All right. And then next, we'll go ahead and put our fuel sender unit back on. And if you remember, we had the locks was damaged on it, so it's not really going to want to lock itself in place. It will just slide on like that. But I do have a solution. What I'm going to do is take a small zip tie. I'm going to run it under this rod, back behind the sender, and then I'm going to go back over the sender. Just clip that in place. I'm not going to draw it up real tight. I want to let that be able to float, because this rod has to be able to float up and down when you reinstall the pump. So you don't want it real tight against it. But it is tight enough that the sender can't come off of the rails. So we'll just clip that right there like that. And then all we've got to do is put on the fuel filter. So what we'll do is just take your filter, line it up, press it down on there all the way. All right, now once you've got it bottomed out, I'm gonna get you up here close again. There's a little lug in the center there that has that lock that holds that filter in place. Now what I've done is I took a small socket and I put just a little tab of grease on there to hold that lock in place. And then I'll just press that right onto that lug on the bottom of the fuel pump to lock that filter in place. Just like that. All right. Okay. Well, this little rascal's ready to reinstall now. Okay, well, I'm about to install our remanufactured fuel pump. And what I did on the fuel tank is when I drew that sample of fuel out of there, I was kind of concerned it was kind of dirty, so I siphoned all the fuel out of the tank. And then you want to get in there with a rag and wipe around, so if there's any sediment or anything in the bottom, get all that out of there. Now, my big old ham hand, I couldn't reach down in there and do all that, so I had to employ the help of my wife with her little monkey hands to get down in there with the rag and wipe all that out, so kudos to her. But anyway, so I'm ready to reinstall this. Now, one last thing is be sure to replace the seal that comes in the kit on the underside of the lip for the fuel pump. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to start this in with our sender float first. Just kind of ease it down in there like that. Now, one other thing that I noticed when I was taking this apart is I couldn't really tell what the proper orientation was. I mean, this thing doesn't have a lug to lock it in any particular orientation, and the float really needs to be pointing forward so it doesn't contact the sides of the fuel tank, get hung up, and then your fuel gauge didn't work right. So what I did is I basically went on to Polaris's parts website, and even though they don't service this fuel pump separately, I was able to zoom in on the picture that showed the pump and the tank assembly, and it showed this little directional arrow was facing to the rear. So when I lock all this down, I'm going to put that facing the rear just like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take our locking ring here, loop it over the end of that pump, and I'm just going to push that pump down against the springs and then start threading that nut on there. Now, before I tighten it up, I'm gonna take another look again and make sure I have that arrow facing toward the rear. And once I'm happy with that, then I'm gonna go ahead and tighten it down. Next, I'm gonna reconnect our wire. Just line it up real good so it locks in place. And for right now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave our test adapter in place because I wanna check our fuel pressure. So I'm just gonna click it back on, make sure it's good and tight. All right, and we'll purge our lines and test our fuel pressure again. That's what I'm talking about right there. We're actually holding about 55 PSI. That's good. Yep, I like that. All right, so now all we've got left to do is to remove our test hose harness there. And then we'll just reconnect the high pressure line, and I'll probably still run it for a little bit and just kind of look real careful down here and make sure we don't have any leaks. And then all we got to do is just replace our 2 screws for our tray, put the trays back in place, put the seat on, and we'll be done with this project. Alrighty, well that's going to wrap up our Ranger 570 fuel pump project. It wasn't too hard to do. I mean, heck, if this old redneck can do it, I guarantee you can do it too. Alright, drop me some comments down in the comment section below. Swing by D-Ray shop anytime. You never know what we're liable to be working on next. Yep. Heck, well, I wish I had somebody to ride with me right now. Well, what do you know? Alright, well, as always, catch y'all next time around. Y'all have a good one. We'll see you.